much going into our own silos to deal with single issues and how we feel about that, as opposed to really looking at here's a chance for us to really talk about, instead of just union democracy that we're fighting for, how about we really are fighting for working class democracy? And that way you're more inclusive of lots of different other marginalized people, rather than if you're not in the union, we're not fighting for you. We're advancing our own issues. And so I think those are the conversations that we need to be having. And the deeper conversations have to be about race and how racial capitalism are affecting Black folks and other people of color, because it is heavy. It's heavy.
Hello, powerful people, and welcome back to the Power at Work blog. My name is Seth Harris. I'm a senior fellow from the Burns Center for Social Change. Really glad that you decided to listen to this blogcast about labor podcasting and labor issues. I'm going to speak with four of my fellow labor podcasters today. We're going to talk about their shows, their interests, their audiences, and their opinions on some current labor issues. We've got a pair of pairs for you today. We've got both hosts of the Black Work Talk podcast, and we have both hosts of the Valley Labor Report, both terrific shows that look at labor issues from very, very different perspectives, and perspectives that we need to hear more of, in my opinion, and that's why we were delighted to host them here on the Power at Work blog. It's a great conversation, and we are absolutely delighted that you decided to be a part of it. But before we get to that conversation, I want to extend a personal invitation to a very special event on the Northeastern University campus on March 27th at 6:30 p.m. The Power at Work blog, the Burns Center for Social Change, and the Massachusetts State House Employees Union will host journalist Hamilton Nolan for an in-person question and answer session and book talk about his new book, The Hammer. I've read it. It's terrific. The event will be held in 101 Belvedere Hall on the Northeastern campus. I will host, along with Thomas Pelkey of the Massachusetts State House Employees Union. It'll be, I think, a fascinating discussion. Space is strictly limited, so reserve your place today by scanning the QR code that's on the screen right now, or send an email to and give us your name and your email address, and send that email to poweratwork@theburnscenter.org. That's poweratwork@theburnscenter.org. Tell your friends, tell your union siblings, they're welcome too, but you need to register right now. Space is disappearing as we speak. So we have four terrific guests today. Bianca Cunningham and Jamala Rogers host the Black Work Talk podcast. Black Work Talk is a show that elevates the voices of Black labor workers, leaders, activists, and intellectuals in discussions on the connections between race and labor, capitalism, and culture in the struggle for progressive governing power. Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison host the Valley Labor Report. The Valley Labor Report is Alabama's only union talk radio show. It's broadcast live on Saturday mornings on 92.5 FM and 770 AM WVNN in the Huntsville, Decatur, Athens listening area. The Valley Labor Report also can be heard at other times on WZZA in Tuscumbia and Muscle Shoals, and 102.3 FM WHIV in New Orleans, Louisiana. But anybody anywhere in the country can listen to it, because they live stream on YouTube, and then you can watch the YouTube recording later on if you would like. So those are our guests. You are our audience. Here's our discussion. Enjoy. Well, we have a full house today, or maybe a full screen is a better way to describe it. And we're so excited to have all of you here, some of our favorite labor podcasters, radio personalities. We've done this before. We've had labor podcasters on. It went really well. It was extremely popular with our audience. So we decided we wanted to do it again. And you're a great group of guests, and you're really generous to be with us. Let me just say, one of the lessons I learned from our first roundtable with labor podcasters is that, surprisingly enough, labor podcasters really, really like to talk. And so it went a little long, but let me just say, I'm not saying that so that you'll edit yourselves. The opposite. I mean, that's the whole idea, is for you to talk and for us to listen. So I'm excited to have all of you here. And I'm going to say, I have to take a personal aside just for a second. I'm a huge fan of Black Work Talk, and I learned a tremendous amount from it. But I have a very special place in my heart for the Valley Labor Report. And Jacob actually mentioned this before we started recording. You guys interviewed my son, Daniel, in 2020. And Daniel had written a piece for a University of Chicago publication attacking right to work laws. You can see it sort of runs in the family. And you had him on the show to talk about it. So his mother and I were watching the YouTube live cast of our son being interviewed by you guys. And so we just absolutely fell in love with Valley Labor Report. And so that's a tip for you wannabe podcasters out there. If you want to earn the loyalty of your audience, have their kids on your show. Invite their kids on your show. Adam and Jacob are forever etched into our hearts here in Bethesda, Maryland. So thank you guys again for doing that. So before we start talking about workers and worker organizing, I'd love our audience to get to know you a little bit better and sort of why you're in labor podcasting. And I think all four of you have other jobs, right? My guess is that none of you went into labor podcasting because you think or labor radio because you thought it was going to make you rich. And my guess is it hasn't made you rich so far, but you never know. You never know how this is going to work out. So let's start, Bianca, if you don't mind, let me start with you. And maybe you can tell me what your other professional life is and what made you decide to combine labor podcasting with your other professional life.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. I am the campaign director for an organization called Bargaining for the Common Good. It's a network of unions and community organizations around the country who are coming together to apply the framework of using bargaining or organizing leverage to win for the community as a whole. And so I've been in that role for the last about 3 years now. Before that, I was with Labor Notes, and before that, I was a rank and file worker who organized my workplace to join CWA about 10 years ago. What made me get into labor podcasting was just the opportunity. I had been a guest on Black Work Talk before when it was Stephen Pitts. Really huge fan of the show. And, when he decided to retire and they reached out to me to replace him, I thought like, well, what would I say? Stephen is so brilliant and I am, just me. But, one of the things that compelled me to go through and go ahead and try it was just the feeling of being a rank and file worker. Honestly, coming into the work like the way that I did, I felt kind of disconnected sometimes from some of like the more academic or kind of jargony types of like programming. And I thought like, wow, I haven't really like heard a lot of spaces where like rank and file Black workers' voices are centered, and we're not talking to like even the union president maybe, but we're just talking about like experiences on the shop floor, etc. And so I wanted to, use the platform as an opportunity to, amplify those types of voices.
That's fantastic. And let me just say, Stephen Pitts is a legend, and as you say, a brilliant man who made a major contribution, a huge contribution. So Jamala, what about you? What is your other professional life, and what made you decide to combine it with labor podcasting?
I don't ordinarily use the word professional because there's so many different hats that I wear. But I will say that the what's grounded me for the last nearly 45 years is founding and being a part of the Organization for Black Struggle. So this is our 45th. We're going into our 45th year of existence, and workers' rights is one of the four pillars when we were founded in 1980. And so some of us came out of working class experiences and backgrounds. At the time that we founded the Organization for Black Struggle, we had all the major auto workers as members. And so they really did help to shape the organization in the early stages. And so that's always been one of our strong pillars. And so I've never specifically done podcasts about workers. But I certainly have done radio shows and that covers a wide range of subjects, but always there's going to be an inclusion of worker rights, but not just that in itself as some silo, but how it actually intersects with other issues and other movements. So that's really, and then I was invited, much like Bianca, to co-anchor Black Work Talk. I guess it would take two people to fill Pitts' shoes, so that's what happened. So I am honored to be a part of it. Yes.
And so does Black Work Talk intersect with your work with the Organization for Black Struggle? Are there, I hate this word, but are there synergies between the podcasting and your organizing work?
I don't think it's as full as it could be, but some of the people that we interact with, I've suggested they be on the show. Like OBS is part of the National Black Workers Center, and so we've had those folks on, and we probably will have them on again, or at least the different the various chapters and what they're doing. But we had the Tanya from the national come on. So in those ways, there's interaction, and then we alert our membership. Okay, somebody is getting ready to to come on, and so that heightens the expectations. So yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Absolutely.
we only did like a half of a season, and so we're hoping to find ways to really amplify the program and also to introduce them to new audiences.
Yeah, I hope you do too. I think it's terrific. I think that it's approaching issues from a perspective that we don't hear often enough, and so I'm excited for you to keep doing more. I'm not pushing you to do more, but I'm excited to hear you do more. Adam, so you and Jacob are famously frontline workers and union members, right? So tell us a little bit about. I'm not going to use I'm properly chastised on using the word professional. So what is your other occupational life? Is that right? In addition to your labor radio gig.
Sure. So I am a community organizer with a statewide nonprofit coalition called Alabama Arise, and we fight poverty at the public policy level in Montgomery, in the state capital here in Alabama. And I've been doing that since August. We unionized our staff with CWA 3908, was really proud to take part in that. On the side, as you can see here, I'm a member of IATSE, Local 900. I am a union stagehand on the side and serve as the political coordinator for the local. Really love those brothers and sisters, and it's a great gig. It's definitely a different kind of gig than what I was used to. I started out as a high school history teacher, was a rank and file activist, and then got hired by the National Education Association affiliate down here, represented about 1,500 Huntsville City Schools employees. Did that for over 5 years. Won some fights, lost a whole lot more fights, but learned a whole lot for sure, and especially about building coalitions. And really that's what drives me, is the desire to build a working class movement, especially here in the South. And I see a lot of synergies with the many hats I wear. I'm also involved in the North Alabama Labor Council with my brother here, Jacob. And but between all of it, it's all intersecting in different ways, but it's all to drive a movement of working people that can really build better lives for all of us. And that's so critically needed down here in the Deep South. So that's what I'm all about. It's what drives me. And I love being able to do the radio show, podcast, and get to interact with cool people like Bianca here, who we've talked to on the show. We, just get to meet so many really cool, interesting, talented, driven people who are making a difference in the world. And, it's a cool opportunity to engage folks in that way. And so I love how it can really boost the organizing that I'm trying to do.
Yeah. I actually joke on my blogcast that the entire reason that I do it is so I can get together my fun, smart, union supporting friends and talk about the stuff we talk about in private, but do it in a more public way. So, Jacob, what about you? Tell us a little bit about the rest of your work life. I'm searching for the right phrase here because I don't want to use professional. Tell us about the rest of your work life.
Sure, yeah,
And your labor life, the rest of your labor life too.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, the professional word. My workplace is actually divvied into, and I'm a federal employee. I'm a member of the American Federation of Government Employees, Local 1858. I'm a steward with my union, and federal workplaces are actually officially, policy by or statute or whatever it is. We are bifurcated by whether or not we are professional. So I'm actually in a non-professional bargaining unit, officially. So I am a non-professional, even though I've got a whole, bachelor's degree, and you have to have a degree to be in my job. I am non-professional, and so that's kind of interesting. But like I said, I'm a steward with my union, and I serve as a delegate for my union on the North Alabama Area Labor Council. I was just elected president of the Labor Council back in December after our former president didn't want to run anymore. And that sounds, it can sound more impressive than it is. One thing that I like to say is that I think that I'm probably the youngest Labor Federation president in the country. Probably. I don't know anybody else that's younger than me. I would be interested to meet him leading up a CLC or a state federation. But, it's also just the fact that nobody else wanted to do it. So, so like I said, it sounds a lot more, impressive than it is. The youngest Labor Federation leader in the country was like, yeah, that's true. But also nobody else wanted to do it. So, and that's how actually, I think that is actually a lot of people's experience with, working in these movement spaces and in unions. They fall into their steward's role because, they care about their coworkers, they care about this kind of stuff, or they were activated by one thing or another and nobody else wanted to do it. And they said the work needs to get done. And so I'm going to do it. Right. That's how so many of us fall into these kind of things.
Yeah. So I want to I want to say, we're going to put out a national call. How old are you, Jacob?
27.
27. Okay. So yes. If anyone knows of a Central Labor Council president, if anyone knows of a Central Labor Council president younger than 27, I want you to let us know. And we're going to bring Jacob and that president on together, and they're going to compare notes on the Power at Work blog. So come on, everybody. Let's get our audience involved in doing a little bit of a search for the country's youngest Central Labor Council president. Go ahead, Jacob. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm looking forward to the conversation. But and like you said, we interviewed your son back in 2020. So we have been. This is our. Actually, March is the 4th anniversary of when we went public with our project, and May is the 4-year anniversary of when we actually got on terrestrial radio. And I started it with David Story. He was at that time president of the Machinists Union here. He's still a supporter of the project, but he needed to step back to take some time to do other things. And, the reason that we wanted to do that, what we're doing, is because there's just such a dearth of information about working people's rights and unions, and what even is a union, right? There's so many people that come out of high school, they don't know about their rights or the opportunities that they have through the building trades, for example, or other unions that you don't have to have a college degree for, that we wanted to make sure we educated folks about. And we do this as a podcast, but we are, like I said, also on terrestrial radio. And we've grown a lot since 2020. We started as just an all-volunteer project, myself and David. 2 people. Now we have 7 people involved in the project.
Wow.
Everybody besides myself and Adam is paid at least $21 an hour. We're really proud of that. Adam and I are the only volunteers on the project anymore. We're on 4 radio stations in 3 states across the South. 1 million views on YouTube, 70,000 downloads on our podcast feed. So for something that is, like I said, like you can tell, I have a full-time job. I'm president of Labor Council. Adam has a full-time job. He also does stagehand gigs on the weekend. For what it is, I think I'm pretty proud of what we've been able to build here, and I super resonate with the idea that at least 30% of the reason that I like to do this is I can just anybody that I think is interesting. Hey, do you want to come on my radio show? It's a lot easier to do that than, hey, can I can't just call up an international union president and say, hey, can you just chat with me? I have some questions for you. But I can absolutely say, hey, do you want to be on my radio show? Right. So it's really nice.
Yeah. I'm with you completely. All right, let's turn to issues.
Seth, can I just speak
Please.
to a point
Absolutely.
that Jacob made, because we were dismissive and it was humorous, but this whole issue of leadership by default is really undermining and killing our movements, and that's not just the labor movement, that's the social justice movements as well. And it means 2 things. One, that we haven't developed a leadership pathway so that when somebody, whatever reason, go to jail, die, that there's somebody to take the place. The other thing is that because it's such an isolated position, people often they get the slings and arrows of people's frustrations, and so it's not a job that we have promoted as being something important to our movements. And so I think at some point we have to really explore that and figure out ways how we are not going to have a default leadership. And not to say this about you, Jacob, but some of the folks who have been catapulted are not the folks who need to be in those positions, quite frankly. So
yeah, I want to agree with you, but I also want to add that we also don't train people to be leaders. Leadership is a skill set. People aren't born. You hear the phrase "born leaders." That's not really true. You can learn how to be an effective leader, but when a leadership opening presents itself, a lot of people just feel unprepared. They're not sure that they could do it. They don't necessarily think they understand the job, and they don't know what leading a group of people or even managing a group of people would consist of. So we leave people without the preparation that they would need. We don't have a succession plan, and we don't have the training that we need. So I want to agree with you, but I want to get us talking about workers and worker issues, although that also was a very important worker issue.
You can stay up to date with the latest news about workers, worker power, and unions by subscribing to the Power at Work blog. You'll receive the Weekly Download, a Power at Work newsletter sent straight to your inbox. The Weekly Download collects about 24 of the week's articles, academic studies, press releases, podcasts, and videos from across the internet. We find the stories and deliver them directly to you. So subscribe to the Weekly Download right now on the front page of the Power at Work blog. Go to poweratwork.us.
And I want to start by talking about the South, not just because Adam and Jacob are there and broadcast in the South, but also because the South is home to a disproportionately large number of Black workers. Black workers represent a very sizable percentage of the labor force throughout the southern states, and also many of what used to be called the border states. I'm not really sure what we call Missouri now.
Jamala, I call it part of the Confederacy.
Okay. So we all know that the power structure in the South is rabidly anti-union, and that every state in the old Confederacy is a right-to-work state, and that those southern states that at one point allowed public employee unions are really, like Florida, are really quite aggressively trying to weaken or undermine or even destroy those unions. And that's happening not just in the South, that's happening in states like Iowa and others that have conservative governments. But at the same time, there's a lot of organizing going on in the South. The UAW is organizing auto plants in the South. Workers United are organizing Starbucks stores in the South. 3 large unions are organizing Delta Airlines employees, and Delta is headquartered in the South, in Atlanta, Georgia. The Union of Southern Service Workers, which is a fairly new organization supported by the service employees, is organizing low-wage service sector workers in a lot of different locations. And I think it's fair to say that the building trades unions are going to be gaining a lot of members and doing a bunch of organizing around the big public investments that President Biden and Congress put in place, like the bipartisan infrastructure law. So Adam, I want to ask you this. So I take all of that, and I from a top down perspective, because I look at things from a national perspective, because I'm not there in the South with you. It looks like there's a lot going on in union world and organizing world. Are you seeing any of this organizing in Alabama and the other states that you have visibility into? And do you expect to see meaningful union membership growth in the South in the coming years?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. I mean, I'm torn on it, honestly. I'm definitely seeing the organizing, and I think you're right to highlight the ones that you highlighted, and UAW in particular, just because of the sheer scale of it, the historic nature of it, is giving a boost to, I think, the entire movement down here, for sure. It is, a monumental campaign to tackle these non-union auto plants who moved it to the South explicitly to get away from unions, right? Because the South's economic model has long been premised on cheaper labor, less educated labor, labor that is divided by race and ethnicity and religion, and so on, right? And so that has been the long time model of the South. I think the labor movement does appear to be resurgent. And, if you look at the numbers, the South by and large grew. Most of the states in the South grew their union membership numbers over the past year. Alabama's had consecutive growth the last couple of years. And Alabama does have higher union density than a lot of the other states in the South. And of course, I know Bianca will talk about some of the really cool stuff happening in Tennessee. There's exciting stuff happening in Georgia. But amid all that is an onslaught of political attacks from state legislatures, from business groups, all sorts of political allies, anyone they can find to pump out anti-union propaganda, which has long dominated the public space down here and is escalating. As labor has been resurgent, so has the anti-campaign. And so that's something that really, is on my radar. I think it's something that bothers all of us. It's, why we do what we do, to try to educate folks and get a different message out there, because it is, very overwhelming, the forces that are arrayed against us down here, which is all the more reason to do it, frankly.
Yeah. If it's not a fight worth fighting, right, you shouldn't do it. And taking on a power structure and a racial structure hierarchy that's been in place for a very, very, very long time in those states. Jacob, one of the great things that Valley Labor Report does, in addition to the radio show and the podcast, is on your website. I think it's every week, you put out essentially a newsletter that lists the organizing that that organizing campaigns, or I guess it's NLRB petition filings and maybe some other petition filings as well. So what are the organizing efforts in your part of the country that you think folks should be looking at that maybe they're not looking at? Some maybe early indicators that there is a surge of union activity in Alabama and some of the surrounding states.
Well, man, there's so much that I have to say on it. Like you said, it's funny enough. Before we started, you said labor podcasters, they like to talk. So, if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers, one of the things that will actually stick out if you take a look at state by state is that the only states that actually increased in union density, more or less, were Southern Republican states, and the Democratic, more typically you would think of as union-friendly states actually decreased in density. That was the general rule for the last year. And Alabama is very much a part of that. We have, for 2 years in a row now, increased union density, while nationwide and then in other, more blue states, union density has fallen. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic here that states on either side of the national average are coming to the mean. But when you ask what are some things that maybe people aren't looking at that they should as far as organizing, the United Campus Workers are doing some really interesting things. We just got an email yesterday about how they have formed a union at Jacksonville State University in Alabama. And they are pushing for a living wage campaign. And one thing that if you're aware of the public sector labor law in Alabama, the thing that you'll know about it is that it doesn't really exist. There's no provision for collective bargaining in the state of Alabama. There's no provision for public sector union elections or anything like that. And so they just declared it. And now they're moving forward in that capacity. The United Campus Workers have also done that at other universities in Alabama with some amount of success. I think that's pretty exciting. The things that you mentioned, though, are obviously some of the highlights. The Starbucks and UAW campaigns. And I think that those are really the campaigns that other unions should be looking to try to emulate as much as possible, and emulate in the sense that these are not spontaneous campaigns that were placed in the lap of union leaders, right? These were campaigns that were meticulously strategized and, money pushed into it, resources pushed into it, personnel pushed into it. And that is what it's going to take. Obviously, these are uniquely ripe sectors for organizing, uniquely ripe companies for organizing, but it's going to take a concerted push to organize the South. And if we're going to organize the country and change the country, we're going to have to do that in the South. And we're going to have to actually think about that strategically. And you spoke about Georgia. There's a lot of dollars from Biden's infrastructure bills that are going into Georgia, but not a lot of that is being built union. And so we have to think about that. The building trades have to think about that. Allied unions in the Labor Federation, in the AFL-CIO, and the labor councils are going to have to think about how we can capture that work that is being done currently non-union, how we can organize those non-union contractors. And we're going to have to do that at all the other workplaces in the South, because it's not just going to happen because of what you and Adam said, the concerted political attacks on working people in the South.
Yeah. Jamala, in order for the organizing that we've been talking about to succeed in the South, and this is true in a lot of parts of the country, Black workers are going to have to play a leading role. And I wonder whether or not Black working class Americans see the labor movement as their likeliest pathway to success. The history is a difficult one in the relationship between the labor movement and Black workers in America. And when they look at the leadership of the labor movement in the United States, there are some Black presidents, but most of them are not. And in some unions, like the building trades, you have a fairly small representation of Black workers, and let me add, women workers. And we've recently had guests who've come on to talk about how they're trying to do more to diversify the building trades. Is the organizing that we're talking about relevant to Black workers? Do you think that Black workers feel it's relevant to them? And if not, what other pathway could there be? What else is available? What's the alternative?
That's an interesting question. It's a complicated one, because when I think about the way that I hear Black folks talking about unions, is not unlike how they talk about the Democratic Party. So I think to the points that you made about what the unions look like, and it's not just that, but it's also how they operate in a very hierarchical, patriarchy way. patriarchal ways, particularly for those unions that are predominantly women of color. You still see that stratification. And part of it, even if there is a female in leadership, it's clear that they're not the decision makers, and that's the problem. And so when folks, the Organization for Black Struggles are part of Missouri Jobs with Justice, and I remember one of my tasks in that organization was to create a small, mass piece that would talk about the benefits of a union. And I can, chapter and verse, I can do that and have to remind people that's how you got a 40-hour week. It's lots of things. But in terms of the relevancy now, the history is important, but how is that manifesting itself on people's jobs? Are people reaching out to workers? Are they understanding what they do outside of that job so that they can have a better feel of what does it mean to bring this person in? What am I going to have to do differently with these folks? I remember doing a number of sort of racial diversity trainings for unions in a post-Ferguson world because they now realize, okay, we need to get some people of color leadership here, and we don't know how to do it, and folks are not comfortable. But the problem was that that went away after the fervor of Ferguson went away, and so the commitment to really changing the cultural dynamics inside a union and really build for working class power, I think it's still a challenge. I don't know that there's another place or another pathway. I think we have to challenge unions to do better in terms of organizing women and people of color.
Yeah, I that's poignant for me because the issues that Adam talked about earlier about racial division are still prominent in parts of the labor movement, and the labor movement should be the leading force in unification of the working class, in service of advancing everyone's interests. And Bianca, let me turn to you, and I'm going to start by telling you something you know very well, and that is that we're living in an era of racial reaction. Diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are under attack. Actually, it was just Alabama outlawed it or defunded it or both. But they're not the only ones. Florida did it. Other states are doing it. Texas has done it. The Supreme Court dealt a very serious blow to affirmative action in higher education last year, taking a preposterous view of the United States Constitution's Civil War amendments. And so the cultural push that Jamala was just talking about, the effort to change the culture after Ferguson, after George Floyd's murder, if anything, it feels very much like our society is going in the opposite direction. Is it your sense that worker organizing can reverse that reactionary tide on race?
Yeah. I mean, so I think history has taught us that organizing can reverse, that type of reactionary streak. But I would say that, my own experience is organizing in my own workplace. Most of the folks in the bargaining unit were Afro-Caribbean, was like 98% Afro-Caribbean. I feel like what unions fail to kind of address is the way that corporations use race as a thing to divide the workers, right? So like just thinking about my own Verizon Wireless experience, 98% Afro-Caribbean workforce coming into a mostly white local, Italian, Polish, kind of like the traditional union membership in Brooklyn. I feel like, so, we experience like racism in two facets. Number one, the company itself, Verizon, going to the one store in Brighton Beach, that is Russian speaking, where there's like 5 white guys, right? To say like, don't join with your coworkers to do this union. You have nothing in common with them. They just want to get off with being lazy. It just so happens that most of those workers were promoted to then spy on us, and then let go, of course, after we won the union. So I think that's like the company using that division, but also like our experience as we went through the process of bargaining, had to go on strike for 49 days for our first contract, was that even on the picket lines where we were picketing in front of our stores with more traditional like landline, members who were, mostly white and older, there was even some like, I think some culture around like when you're a really militant union and you're trying to hold the line, there's a lot of things that are said to people who cross the line, and some of those things could be racial epithets, some of those things could be really offensive. And I think I was looking at my coworkers looking at me like, we were so excited about the union organizing that we were doing. The union presented this as us standing on the shoulders of folks in the civil rights movement, folks who have been part of like, radical Black organizing. But now that we're here, it seems like we're not really welcome, or like that our stories aren't really like welcome here. And so even in that experience, having to like recollect, right? Like let's all stop. Okay, you're not anti-union, you're just having a bad experience with some of the members. And so I just think that like more credence needs to be given to like the ways in which like actually it's not just like addressing racist members, it's like actually, like Jamala said, like in the fabric of the culture. I would also say that I think it's really hard. Like I do some of that DEI. I don't like to call it DEI, but like race and labor. Bill Fletcher Jr., April Sims developed this race and labor to talk to, unions about like how they can transform their culture and address racism in a different way. And I just feel like, I have had great unions reach out to me and say, usually around tragedies or around George Floyd or Ferguson, say like, oh, we've got to have a conversation. One of the things I was doing at Labor Notes, though, is saying like, okay, we're not just going to talk to people who are just like frantically trying to have a conversation. We want to talk to people who are willing to go deep into their membership and their leadership to really like identify the root causes and like try to really like transform themselves. And so that was like one, like, okay, so even when I'm working with people who have like made the commitment to like go deep with their membership, it's like they're still scared of their membership. They're still scared of those reactionary members. They're still afraid of like, okay, you can do it here, but like maybe that's not the best audience for it. And one of the things I always stress is it has to be everybody. We've got to figure out how to talk to white folks in rural conservative areas to get this through. Like it can't just be you doing this in the very metropolitan concentrations of your leadership. And so I do feel like organizing can help, but I think the way that we organize needs to be addressed.
Can I just say, we got to have you back and we got to talk about that subject much more deeply. And I think I may try to figure out a way to get you to give that training on this Blogcast, because I couldn't ever, I want to second everything that you just said. It's so powerful and important. Culture change inside the labor movement. There's no reason to expect that the labor movement, which is a function of our society, is going to be radically different from our society, or that everybody who's a union member is going to have a different attitude towards issues in our society simply because they are a union member. They're working people, right? They're very, very diverse. I've done a lot of telephone calls with a lot of reporters who keep asking me, why is it that union members are voting for Donald Trump? It's like, well, because they're Americans, and some of them agree with him. And they've always been either Republicans or very conservative, or even more so. It's just there's just this closed-minded view or monolithic view of the labor movement as this progressive force in our society. And on issues of race, there's still a huge amount more to do. So thank you for all of those comments, all of you. The people I spend my time talking to in Boston, in Washington, in New York, I'm guessing we're having very different conversations than the conversations that you all are engaging in. And so one of the reasons I wanted to do this Blogcast with this group of folks is I want you to educate me about all of those conversations that are going on, you and your audiences, that are very different from the conversations that I'm having with people on what we call the Acela corridor, right, where Amtrak runs between Boston and Washington at a very high speed of almost 25 miles an hour. So Jamala and Bianca, let me start with you on this one, Bianca. I want to give you a chance to talk about your audience And what are the issues that they are focusing on? What are the issues that they want to hear about from you and that they're talking about amongst themselves in the context of workers, worker power, and collective action?
Yeah, thanks. Most of the organizing that I do in the South is based in Tennessee. I could say that we're trying to transform the conversation that we're having, but it's because what we've heard is that there's like two main things that like I think all across the board people care about, which is cost of living right now. That includes housing, groceries, all that stuff, as well as the quality of education and public education, and what is going to happen with public education given all of these Republican attacks. And so I feel like we've been trying to transform the conversation for the last few years that I've been down here. And one of the things that we're trying to do is say not only is it your employer, but like think about it bigger, it's about corporate overreach in the state, right? So like, why is it that we have, all of this 26,000 new jobs will be added to Tennessee before 2025, most of them in electrical vehicle, battery, auto. Why do you think they came down here? Because all the reasons Adam said, right? Because they got a crap ton of money from the government to do it. They got so many subsidies, tax subsidies. They're getting the land for $1, whatever it is, right? But then talk about like, why did we feel like these corporations that are coming from the outside have like more power than what we have? Because they're actually the ones that are controlling like our cost of living. They're actually controlling our safety at work. They're actually controlling our kids' education. And so right now, I'll just say like I'm in an office in Memphis, Tennessee. Our message is kids, not corporations. That's probably going to show it backwards. But like we're trying to very like simplify it. Like we want a future for ourselves, for our families, for our neighbors, not for corporations. So that's simply what we say.
Great. Jamala, what are the conversations that you're having in the communities that you're talking to on your podcast and just the folks that you're talking to day to day?
So it varies. And I think just because I'm mainly in the company of working class Black folks, it is different from even social movement Black folks, because their needs are quite different. And it's no different than what Bianca's talking about, and that is just everyday kind of basic needs, human rights basic needs kind of thing. And so, for example, uh, in here, like most places, gentrification is pushing out working class Black folks out of stable neighborhoods that they've been in for a while. And who's doing that gentrification are middle class and upper middle class white people. And so, so there's this tension around that. And then in some cases, it's causing, unhoused and homelessness. And so, the places where there could be more conversations about the why and what is the working class perspective around even housing and gentrification, we are missing opportunities to do that. I was reading something about the praise for the UAW being one of the largest unions and the first one to actually call for a ceasefire in Gaza. And of course, that's commendable. But then when the UAW turned around and endorsed Biden for president, people were like, "Whoa, what happened? Just what happened there?" Well, now we need to have a conversation about strategy and tactics, because something is missing here, and I don't think we are doing that. We are very much going into our own silos to deal with single issues and how we feel about that, as opposed to really looking at, here's a chance for us to really talk about, instead of just union democracy that we're fighting for, how about we really are fighting for working class democracy? And that way you're more inclusive of lots of different other marginalized people, rather than, if you're not in the union, we're not fighting for you. We're advancing our own issues. And so I think those are the conversations that we need to be having. And the deeper conversations have to be about race and how racial capitalism are affecting Black folks and other people of color, because it is heavy. It's heavy. And so I don't hear as much from labor organizers or labor leaders talking about that. I haven't heard that really since Trump came to Ferguson. to talk about what was going on there and making some commitments, and that he actually did follow through with. So that's not on the top. And even when we're talking about reparations, I don't hear unions really talking about that. And that is an issue that's gaining more traction in a lot of cities, because the Black mayors at their conference a few years ago decided we're going to set up commissions to look at that, and folks are taking it very seriously. And so what does that look like for unions, and who's talking about that, and what's their view on that, and are they going to be allies as we fight for reparations? And so some of those questions, then people kind of take a hands off. Well, that's not really a union issue. Well, your union members are talking about it, so what is that about?
Yeah, that's
So
a
there's
bit.
just yeah, it's just ways that we could be talking about these issues very differently.
Yeah, I apologize for interrupting you, but that is
That's
a
okay.
huge question. And that is, what is a union issue? How far do union issues stretch? What should we be talking about? Some folks are talking about Gaza. Some folks are talking about wages, and sort of where is it a place in between? Is it at either of those ends? Where should we be focusing? All right, Jacob, let me, when you are all standing around the coffee pot, if that's what you're standing around at your Central Labor Council meeting, I didn't want to suggest that you were all standing around something else. So you're all standing around the coffee pot and having the conversation after the meeting or before the meeting. What issues are people talking about? What are the pressing issues in North Central Alabama?
Yeah, well, so that question was specifically about the Labor Council, and so and other
Well, go beyond that. Go beyond that to just working people in the area.
Yeah, because I actually our program and what we do, we kind of uniquely have multiple audiences, right? One of the stations that we are on, and the largest one, is a conservative talk radio station. The same one that Sean Hannity started on, right? And it's still to this day, every day, there's, conservative reactionary garbage. And so this is an audience that we have a lot more interaction with maybe than some other people do. And then we're also on, community radio stations. We're on a Black station in Muscle Shoals. Then we have our online audience. And then I talk to folks in my union and the Labor Council and other unions. And so I, interact with a lot of different folks. And with the Labor Council, there's just, I have been so heartened by the energy that I've seen from the delegates at our Labor Council meetings and their interest in, building the labor movement. I think, especially this year in particular, there's just been a lot of excitement and discussion about what can we do in North Alabama to build our unions and build our power in the community. And so those have been really exciting conversations, and those are the conversations that I really like to have. And they're conversations that I would hope would be happening, all across the country in labor councils and, higher in our individual unions, because we need support to carry out these, to carry out some of the things that we could be doing here in North Alabama if we had the support of, more support from the National Federation or from our international unions. And, but I also know, being in other spaces and other unions, that's not what all these spaces are like. And there's a lot of, some people say that apathy is not a real thing, but for lack of a better word, there's just a lot of people in the labor movement, at union meetings feeling kind of lost. And like there is like, the place we are is kind of inevitable. Our relationship with our employers is kind of inevitable, and there's not really a whole lot that we can do. And you talk to folks who have been doing this a long time, who've kind of defaulted into leadership, kind of like I have with our Labor Council, for good reason, right? Because they're willing to do this work. But I hear constantly complaints about how nobody wants to come to a union meeting anymore. Right? Nobody's willing to work for the union. Nobody's willing to do anything. They just want everything given to them. And there's not enough self-reflection about what can I do to change that as a leader in my union and in my labor council? What can I do to inspire energy in my members? And those are the things, the kind of self-reflection that we need to be having. But then outside of our movement, unfortunately, there is a lot of energy around some of these culture war issues, and the times where we get the most negative feedback are when we venture into areas that are more controversially union issues, right? Some people would say they're not union issues, talking about rights for gay folks, rights for immigrants, talking about the need for a ceasefire in Gaza and why that's a labor issue. Those are the three issues, LGBT stuff, immigrants, and Israel-Palestine. We have never gotten more negative reaction than when we talk about that. Right. And we're on a conservative radio program every single week talking about union, workers deserve higher wages, down with the bosses, up with the workers. Right. We almost never get people calling in upset about that. But these folks have allowed themselves to get spun up thinking that their gay neighbor, their immigrant neighbor, is their enemy. And we have to, and therefore, it is absolutely a labor issue, because we have to reach these people and explain to them that, no, that is not the case. These people have much more in common with you than you do with the owner of your company, and you need to realize that, and we need to have messaging around that, political education campaigns, and I think Sean Fain has been doing a really good job about that when he's talked about the border, or when he's talked about the need for a ceasefire in Gaza. He's made things very clear, very relatable, and, I think that we absolutely need a concerted effort about this, because, like Jamala said, working people are talking about these things, and if we don't help set the narrative, somebody else is gonna, and it's not gonna be people doing it for the better.
Yeah. All right, Adam, you're going to have the final word. Tell us about some of the conversations you're having that the coastal elites like me don't even know are happening.
Wow. Well, I got to say, all three of y'all, I mean, brilliant. And I resonate with so much of what y'all said. I will add one correction, Jacob. There is one more issue that has gotten us that much pushback, which is criticizing the police and talking about racial justice. And so when we have ventured into that territory, we have certainly gotten pushback, including from people in the labor movement. So I'll just leave it at that. But conversations that I'm having with folks, honestly, beyond what has already been discussed, there are a lot of folks struggling. People are struggling. I mean, hardly anyone I know is comfortable, right? I mean, people are struggling financially, struggling to make ends meet. As Bianca said, the cost of living from so many different directions. We also have to acknowledge, I think there is a crisis with people in terms of their spirit. There is a lot of alienation. There's a lot of depression, anxiety. There's a lot of fear. And for all good reasons, right? We look around at the world and it's understandable. But I think we have to acknowledge that a lot of people are struggling internally as well as externally with these material conditions. And obviously the two are so intertwined. But, I think that's all the more reason why the work that, we're all trying to do here and the work of so many folks out here, why that's so important, because folks have to believe in something, and folks have to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. And I think at its best, that's what the labor movement provides, where we can unite around our common interest, because we all want better lives for ourselves and our families and our communities. And when we tap into that and we transcend those divisions, it's really, really powerful. And I think solidarity is our best weapon to counteract this, crisis that we're facing, economically, spiritually, environmentally, you name it. The power of solidarity, the power of collective action and organizing, that is our best hope.
Organizing is optimism. I'm with you completely, Adam. Bianca Cunningham and Jamala Rogers, you can find them on Black Work Talk. Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison, find them on the Valley Labor Report. Find all of us on the Labor Radio Podcast Network. Thanks to all of you for being here. What a pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks a lot for sticking with us all the way through this blogcast. Please go listen to Black Work Talk podcast. Please go listen to Valley Labor Report, and wherever you find them on social media or podcast streaming platforms, give us a 5-star rating, and that way other folks will find this terrific labor content. Part of the job of the Power at Work blog is to lift up others who are doing fantastic work talking about, promoting, advocating for workers, worker power, and collective action. So you can help us in that by promoting this content as well. And I want to let you know that the Power at Work blog and all of the shows that were represented on today's blogcast are proud members of the Labor Radio Podcast Network. The Labor Radio Podcast Network connects over 100 labor radio shows and podcasts. So if you want to learn more about the network or about all of those labor radio shows and podcasts, please go to www.laborradionetwork.org. That's www.laborradionetwork.org. And if you want to listen to or download any or all of the Power at Work blogcasts in podcast form, in audio form, you can find them on your favorite commercial podcast streaming service. You can find it on Spotify. You can find it on Google Podcasts, which is disappearing. You can find it on Overcast. You can find it on Apple Podcasts. Just search Power at Work on any of those platforms, and you will find us, I can assure you. And while you're there, as I said, please do give us a 5-star rating. It just attracts the attention of others who are like you, who care about workers and worker power. Let your friends know, let your union siblings know about us. They'll be grateful, and we will be too. You can connect with the Power at Work blog in a lot of different ways on social media. We have pages on LinkedIn and Facebook. Just search Power at Work blog. You can find us at Power at Work blog on Twitter, X, and Threads. You can find us at Power at Work on Instagram and TikTok. You can find all of our blogcasts, the video blogcasts, on YouTube on the Burns Center for Social Change channel. So you got a lot of different ways of consuming our content. Try them all. Whatever works best for you, we're on board, and we'd love to be in touch with you. I also wanted to let you know that we finally have a comments section on the Power at Work blog. We've just launched it. Try it out. You'll see a few comments there, I think, in a few places, mostly from us, but you'll see some others, perhaps from other people, other listeners. Encourage you to do that. Maybe leave a comment at the end of this blogcast as well. Thanks again for joining us. We will see you again on the blog very soon.
The Power at Work blog is a project of the Burns Center for Social Change at Northeastern University. The Burns Center develops innovative, participatory, and equitable approaches to solving public problems using new technology. Our faculty and fellows are accomplished, nationally recognized changemakers. Interested in learning more? Go to burns.northeastern.edu and sign up for our mailing list. And you can follow us on social media at Burns Center on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. The Burns Center for Social Change, from demanding change to making it.